12 o'clock on your Tuesday. Welcome in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head rolling solo with you on this January 2nd. Terry Ford, a little bit under the weather today. Hopefully he'll be back in tomorrow. We can get the new year officially kicked off once he is back in. But it's me riding solo today, so let me know what your thoughts are on everything going on in the world of sports. Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100 for the Firehouse Subs text line. Yesterday was chock full of football from noon until well after midnight. I brought this up earlier, and I will continue to beat this drum. I don't care about the Rose Bowl's traditions. I don't care about their 2 o'clock start. I don't care about the sunset over the mountains, all that kind of stuff. The fact that the majority of people live on the East Coast, the majority of college football fans live on the East Coast, and we were all up until 1 in the morning having to watch the end of the college football playoff last night between Washington and Texas is asinine. Next year, as we move into the 12-team college football playoff, I really hope that the powers that be put their foot down and tell the Rose Bowl, hey, guess what? If you're going to be part of the 12-team playoff, you're going to have to conform to every other kickoff time like all the other ones do, because kicking off at 5, which is really like 5:10, 5:15, which sets up the second game to kick at 9:10-ish, is ridiculous, and it should have kicked off at 4 on the East Coast, and the second game should have kicked off at 8, and we would have been done before midnight, and we all would have been a little bit more happier this morning instead of cranky like most of us are, having to stay up so late last night to watch the end of the college football playoffs. I know, first world problems, but that can be my one old man yells at cloud reference of the day. Regardless of how late we were up last night, we got treated to 2 very, very highly entertaining games with the college football playoff semifinals. And that's what you hope for every year going in, is just give me 2 good games, 2 good competitive games that I can sink my teeth into for the 8 total hours these games can be on TV. And for so many years of the college football playoff, that's usually not the case. And I brought this statistic up a couple weeks ago. In the 9-year history going into this season, 2/3 of the college football playoff games, whether that be the semifinals or the national championships, have been decided by more than 2 scores. Blowouts, in a sense, when you're talking about the best of the best facing each other, highlighted by last year's national championship game between Georgia and TCU being that 58-point debacle for the Horned Frogs. Last year's semifinals were great between TCU and Michigan, and then Georgia and Ohio State. And the hope was that what really seemed like a very balanced and competitive college football playoff field was going to be 2 more good semifinal games. And that's exactly what we got. Starting off with Georgia, starting off with Alabama and Michigan in the Rose Bowl. And I looked at this game as one of 2 scenarios was going to take place. Either this was going to be a dogfight, tooth and nail down to the end, or Alabama was going to blow out Michigan. And I say that because, and rightfully so, Alabama earns the benefit of the doubt when it comes to these kind of things, because we've seen them do this so many times before, right? And they're the most seasoned team when it comes to the college football playoff. So if they would have gone in there and slapped Michigan around for 4 quarters and won the game 31-7, I don't think anybody here would have been surprised. I didn't think there was a scenario where Michigan was going to be able to go in there and just dominate Alabama themselves and win the game by 3 scores. I didn't think that was going to happen. And what ended up happening, obviously, was a good 4-quarter game between Michigan and Alabama that ended up taking us into overtime. And obviously Michigan coming out on top. If you're looking to tip your hat in only one way, and Michigan's offense did a great job last night, but that defense was the story of the game for me, because They pinned their ears back, and they came and attacked every single play last night. This Alabama offense is not the Tua offense. It's not the Bryce Young offense. It's not as well-rounded as previous Alabama offenses have been in years past. They have predicated themselves on taking advantage of big plays, hitting explosive plays down the field. Jalen Milroe's thrown 23 touchdown passes this season. 16 of those have come via explosive plays. Alabama has receivers capable of making those big catches down the field. Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, guys like that. Michigan's MO coming into this game last night was to take away that big play threat, to make sure that Jalen Milroe was not comfortable enough to attack them down the field. And that's exactly what they did. Milroe only got 3 passes off of greater than 20 yards. He was 1 of 3 on those passes, that one being a 29-yard pass to Isaiah Bond that was on the drive that set up the field goal right before halftime for Alabama. So Michigan's game plan of limiting Alabama of what they were good at worked out perfectly. Now, Alabama's run game definitely stepped up. Jason McClellan running for 2 touchdowns. But that is something that you felt like Michigan was going to be able to manage. If you can just keep Alabama a little bit more one-dimensional, then Michigan should have theoretically been okay. And they were, obviously. And the sacks. The sacks are what really did it. And I mentioned, just keeping that constant pressure. They pressured Jalen Milroe on 56%, not just pressure, blitzed on 56% of his dropbacks to keep him uncomfortable and attack that Alabama offensive line that has struggled a lot this season. One of the worst offensive lines statistically in the entire country. Now, in the latter half of the year, that offensive line had gotten sizably better. They did give up 4 sacks against Georgia in the SEC championship game a couple weeks back, the last time we saw them before last night's Rose Bowl. But compared to the numbers they were putting up at the beginning of the season, they were not sizably better. Well, last night they attacked them. Kept bringing the blitz, kept bringing the pressure, and forcing them into mistakes. Mistakes coming in the form of Seth McLaughlin, the center, and his bad snaps, which has been an issue all season long that has plagued Alabama. Think back to the Auburn game. What ends up setting up Alabama, or ends up being one of the plays that sets up Alabama for that 4th and 31? Well, it's a bad snap that ends up putting them back, 26, 27 yards, something like that, before Milroe threw that ball past the line of scrimmage. The snaps have been an issue all season long. And with that constant pressure that Michigan was bringing all night long, that puts even more of an emphasis on having to be perfect on that offensive line. And again, Seth McLaughlin having a litany of bad snaps late in that game, or throughout the course of the entire game, and ended up really biting him on the last play of the game. When and everybody collectively scratched their heads after it happened of why call a quarterback draw on a 4th and goal with everything on the line. When you go back and look, it seemed like that was setting up to be more of your, RPO type deal where you have kind of your bubble set up on the outside, you have your pulling guard, but it was another low snap, and it seemed like Jalen Milroe, in catching that snap, it was almost kind of a busted play at that point, and he just takes it into his hands and ends up running. Now, I believe Nick Saban after the game said that they thought the best option in that scenario was just running it with Jalen Milroe. I find that a little bit hard to believe, especially when you were, 4 yards out of the end zone. I feel like your better option is probably to throw that ball there. But regardless, low snap, Jalen Milroe takes it straight up the middle, ends up getting stuffed, and obviously Alabama ends up coming up short in overtime there to Michigan. And again, hats off to Michigan's defense for putting that pressure on Milroe and the Alabama offense the entire game. After the game, hearing from the coaches, Jim Harbaugh lofting some very high praise towards his quarterback, J.J. McCarthy.
And in overtime against Alabama, I think the last quarterback to win in overtime against Alabama was none other than Tom Brady. And I've said it before, but this is right here. This is this is the greatest quarterback in University of Michigan football, college football history. Got a long way to go to get to get where Tom Brady eventually got to, which is the GOAT. I mean, he's lapped the field when it comes to that. But in a college career, there's been nobody at Michigan better than JJ. And I know we talk about an amalgamation of quarterbacks. He is that guy.
I've been somebody that's been very critical of JJ McCarthy this season, particularly in the games after all the Connor Stallion stuff came out. And I'm not saying that was a direct correlation, but when you look at a lot of the games they played down the stretch when they started playing tougher competition, Penn State, Ohio State, I mean, J.J. McCarthy, for one, was not really asked to do a whole lot. Now, he made some pretty key throws in that game against Ohio State, but the numbers for the most part in the latter half of the season, pretty pedestrian. 7 of 8 for 60 yards against Penn State, 12 of 23 for 141 and an interception against Maryland, and then 16 of 20 for 148 and one touchdown against Ohio State. Not terrible numbers necessarily, but not eye-popping numbers. I didn't know if when the moment really counted on it, if he was going to be able to put this team on his back and make huge play. And yesterday against Alabama, 7 of 27 for 221 yards and 3 touchdowns. As, being able to step up in that moment, a feather in the cap there for J.J. McCarthy. You talk about that one throw to, was that a Wilson there? They ended up getting tipped, and Wilson made a good play coming back to the ball and being able to run it in there. But J.J. McCarthy cool under pressure against what was a good Alabama defense that got better as the season went along, similarly to their offense as well. And it's weird to look back because now J.J. McCarthy still has just one loss in his career as Michigan's starting quarterback, that being last year's national semifinal to TCU. And it's interesting that he kind of talks about him in the same regard there of Tom Brady. Now, a big difference between college Tom Brady and professional Tom Brady, but like McCarthy's career at Michigan is going to be kind of interesting to look back on whether he wins a national championship in a week from now or not, because there's been very few instances where he's been put in a situation where he has to put the team on his back, has to carry them to a victory himself or anything like that. Now, he didn't necessarily have to do all that himself last night. Had a good running game with Blake Corum, so it wasn't all on McCarthy. But he did step up in some of those key moments last night, make some big throws when he needed to, and help that offense that was pretty sluggish for the most of the second half, step up there at the very end of the fourth quarter, get that tying touchdown, and ultimately, I mean, Blake Corum did most of the work there in the overtime, but help lead them to a position where they could play in overtime for a chance to go to the national championship game, which is exactly what they did. Plenty more to talk about from this game, from the Alabama perspective as well, because while they did come up short, you do have to tip your cap to what Nick Saban and company were able to do out there in Tuscaloosa on what was maybe not the most perfect season by any means for the Crimson Tide. Talk about that and plenty more of the national semifinals as the halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game, the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo with you. Going until 3 and Terry Ford feeling a little bit under the weather today. We'll hopefully get him back here in the Hernan Chevrolet studios tomorrow. Definitely want to hear his thoughts on what happened last night with the college football playoff semifinals. It's interesting coming away from this game. The conversation around Jim Harbaugh. And yes, this has been a season full of controversy for the Michigan football program with investigations and suspensions and the Connor Stallion stuff and everything that's been going on, and the fact that Jim Harbaugh literally missed half of the regular season games through self-imposed suspensions by the Michigan football program. Not to say that that's all going to be forgotten, but he has the opportunity to put a fine point on this season by going out there and winning the national championship on Monday night, taking on Washington. We'll get to what Washington did against Texas in just a moment. But the narrative around this Michigan football program coming into yesterday's game was, could they get over the semifinal hump? This was obviously the third straight college football playoff semifinal they'd taken part in. They played Georgia in the Orange Bowl 2 years ago, and that wasn't a very competitive matchup. Georgia ended up winning that one pretty handily en route to their national championship. They came in as pretty heavy favorites against TCU a season ago in the Fiesta Bowl, and that ended up being a shootout. The TCU obviously won en route to getting routed in the national championship by Georgia last season. So, if Harbaugh goes in there yesterday, loses by 2 touchdowns against Alabama, then everybody's saying, okay, well, has this program hit its ceiling? Can they go any further than that? And you'd be looking at Jim Harbaugh and his potential jump to the NFL as something that could theoretically happen. But now that he's made the national championship game and could be a national championship winning head coach, I wonder what that conversation is going to be like, regardless of what the outcome is going to be on Monday night going forward, now that he has shown the ability to take that program to the next step. Because, and let's look at this, crazy enough, Harbaugh's been at Michigan for almost 10 years now. 2015 being his first season there after leaving the 49ers in the NFL. And for the while, it was like, okay, well, you can't get over the Michigan or the Ohio State hump. Nearly won in 2016, but just kept losing and losing and losing. Finally gets over the hump at 21. He's turned that into 3 straight victories over the enemy from up north. All right, you did that. Win the Big Ten championship. All right, well, now you make it to the college football playoff, and you weren't being able to get out of the semifinals. Well, now you've done that as well. And, again, it has the opportunity to go out there and win the national championship come Monday night. Does this lock in Jim Harbaugh for sure to a future at Michigan? Not going to say 100% certainty, yes, but I would lean towards more likely, you would think, right? Like, he wouldn't get them to a national championship, then cut and run to the NFL, would he? He's an odd enough guy, maybe. But I feel like you finally got this program to the upper echelon of college football, a place that it had not been in basically 2 decades prior, or a decade and a half-ish, I guess. I'd be hard-pressed to think that Harbaugh would suddenly want to go to the NFL and have to rebuild a team, a Panthers, a Bears, whatever it may be, when you literally have, a blue blood program in college football back at the top of the mountain. Now, Harbaugh is obviously not going to talk about any of this until well after the national championship. But again, regardless of what happens on Monday night, I at this point in time don't see any good reason why Jim Harbaugh would decide to go back to the NFL after taking Michigan to the national championship game. But we'll see what happens. The other side of last night's coin when it comes to the Rose Bowl was, of course, Alabama, and them coming up short of reaching another national championship game and giving the SEC another opportunity to win a title. This is going to be the first time since the inaugural college football playoff where Oregon and Ohio State play for the national championship that the SEC doesn't have a shot. You get a Big Ten Pac-12 matchup in the national championship game. Of course, Alabama being the SEC's only hope of getting back there. Nick Saban, after the game last night, assessed this season for the Crimson Tide.
This is one of the most amazing seasons in Alabama football history in terms of where this team came from, what they were able to accomplish, and what they were able to do. Winning the SEC championship, and really proud of this group. And I just wish that I could have done more as a coach to help them be successful and help them finish. And all we can do now is learn from the lessons that sometimes failings bring to us.
It's weird to hear that from a guy like Nick Saban, who is as hard-nosed as they come when it comes to coaching football, to cast any kind of silver lining, especially after a loss like last night's was. But he's absolutely right. This is a year, and we all did it. I'm not afraid to admit it. I, like so many people, wrote Alabama off 3 weeks into the season. They lose at home to Texas, giving up a ton of yards on defense. They go in there, have perhaps the ugliest win of Saban's tenure on the road at South Florida, and we're all sitting here thinking there's no way this team has less than 3 losses, right? They're definitely going to lose to LSU. They're definitely going to lose to Texas A&M, whoever it may be. There's no way this team is making the SEC championship game, much less the college football playoff. And they proved all of us wrong. Again, that offensive line was atrocious at the beginning of the season. Still had its ups and downs, gave up a fair amount of sacks against Tennessee and Georgia, but they got better as the season went along. Jalen Milroe got better as the season went along. Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, got better as the season went along, figuring out how to properly use Jalen Milroe. The defense got better as the season went along. Statistically speaking, this was probably one of the worst teams that Nick Saban's had in his tenure as Alabama's head coach. Certainly one of the worst since he started winning national championships in his, 3rd year there. And he still took that team to college football playoff. I know we are all so ready to proclaim the Alabama dynasty to be done, dead, and over every time Alabama doesn't win the national championship. But if this year was a testament to anything, it's the fact that you can never count them out. As long as Nick Saban's the head coach, they are always going to have a shot. They're always going to have a pulse of being in the mix for the national championship game, especially when we talk about expanding to a 12-team format next year, where let's say Alabama only goes 10-2, maybe even 9-3. Guess what? That's still going to be good enough to get you into the playoff. And with the experience they have in playoff scenarios, they're always going to be dangerous. I don't care if they're the number 1 seed or if they're the 11 seed. As long as Alabama's in, they're always going to have a shot. And if 2 plays go differently last night, if let's say when Jake Thaw fields that punt for Michigan within the 5-yard line, if he muffs that and Alabama falls on it, guess what? We're talking about Alabama winning probably 23-20 with maybe a last-second field goal in that game and going to the national championship game. Can never count them out. They're always going to be there. They're always going to be a factor. As much as we all want them to just go away, for the dynasty to finally be dead, I think this season is a testament to the fact that you can never count out a Nick Saban Alabama coach team. And as tough as this loss is, and you saw Jalen Milroe's emotions walking off the field last night, it's a season they should be proud of. And I know Alabama fans are conditioned to think natty or bust, but it's a season you can be proud of if you're an Alabama fan, and one that you can build off of going into next season as well. But this is where the buck stops for them. They are not going to be playing for the national championship. Michigan is, and they're going to be taking on Washington. And a Washington team that almost let it slip through their fingers last night. We'll talk about the late show that was the Sugar Bowl coming up. It is the halftime show. I'm Tyler Head, flying solo with you until 3 here on The Game and the 107.5 The Game app.
They frequently run the play clock down a lot. In the end zone, touchdown, Jalen McMillan. 19 yards, and the Huskies lead for the fourth time tonight.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. Sean McDonough on the call last night on ESPN. That was the touchdown from Michael Penix Jr. to Jalen McMillan in the third quarter to give the Washington Huskies a 28-21 lead. And it really seemed like Washington was getting set to break that game wide open. Pulled away, put it on ice. They did eventually get up to 37-21, but Texas ended up making it very, very interesting. Only ended up being a 6-point game there in the very late stages as Washington came out of halftime on fire. Third quarter completely belonged to them. Michael Penix Jr. goes 12 of 13 for 117 yards and that one touchdown pass in the third quarter alone. And it seemed like everything was swinging. It was all in the favor of Washington up until about midway through the fourth quarter, where Texas gets that touchdown to cut the lead from 34-21 to 34-28. But then Washington goes down the field, gets that field goal. And even though Texas drove back down, got another field goal, it seemed like everything had set up for Washington to be able to run the clock out or at least put Texas in a position where they're only going to have about 10 or 15 seconds to make something happen at the very end of the game. And then if we have one overarching lesson from college football this season, between this game and between what happened between Miami and Georgia Tech back in the middle of the year, when in doubt, kneel the clock out. Because Washington, by trying to run, and I get it, they're trying to get a first down to completely ice the game away. But Dylan Johnson, their running back, gets hurt. And with an injury, that stops the clock. Texas, of course, did not elect for the 10-second runoff. So the clock stopped and basically bought Texas about another 30 seconds to be able to go down the field. So they get the ball back with 45 seconds to go. They're able to put together a 9-play drive in 45 seconds, get themselves all the way down the 13-yard line, and take 3 shots at the end zone. And if you were like me and stayed awake for this entire thing, you went from actually got all the way down to the 12 at one point for taking a 1-yard loss on a pass to Jaden Blue. So basically set up within the 15 for 5 straight plays to round out the game. And for people like me, again, that were staying up watching this thing to the very end, you perked up thinking, oh my goodness, we're about to get a heartbreaking loss from Washington because of, again, the Dylan Johnson injury that bought Texas about another 30 seconds. And, again, the Texas offense wasn't as on fire in the second half as they were in the first half, but they were making plays when they needed to there in the very end of the game. And Washington, for as strong as they are in so many facets of the game, their pass defense is certainly not one of them. And again, allowed Texas to get down the field pretty quickly there and have a couple shots at the end zone to try and win the game. And, it's funny how they say history repeats itself, right? Because the 3rd and 11 where Ewers ends up throwing the ball out of bounds and 1 second left on the clock. And everybody's memories automatically go back to that 2009 Big 12 championship game. Mack Brown famously holding up the one finger where Texas was down, 12 to, was it? No, it was 10 to 9, I believe, against Nebraska. They get the 1 second back on the clock after Colt McCoy throwing the ball out of bounds, and they end up kicking the field goal, winning it, and go to the national championship game. It seemed like history was going to repeat itself once again, but Ewers' last pass to Donnie Mitchell ends up going incomplete there, and Washington ends up winning. But boy, Texas sure made them sweat. They gave them everything they had, and at the end of the day, we got treated to 2 very, very good, very entertaining college football playoff semifinals. And look, Texas has nothing to be ashamed of. This is a team that, we laughed at, as we do every single year. Oh, Texas is back. Yeah, sure, we'll believe it when we see it. After what, they went 8-5 a season ago, so nobody expected them to make the jump they did. Obviously lost that very entertaining Red River shootout game with Oklahoma out the Cotton Bowl earlier this year. But other than that, unblemished, beat Alabama on the road, whipped Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game a couple weeks back, and comes up just a hair short of making it in the national championship game. You want to talk about a team that's riding a wave of momentum coming to the SEC? Texas absolutely is doing that. But they won't get to play for a national championship. The Washington Huskies will. And Kalen DeBoer, head coach for the Huskies, talked about what this season has meant to the folks at UW.
I think the one thing that was really apparent, in the locker room is ever since probably the midseason Oregon win, when it was really emotional. I think all these wins, as much as when you're in the locker room, you're excited. I think the focus really has gone into kind of a job's not done, and the next one is the most important now. And so I even felt that in there tonight, and guys just enjoying the moment. Realizing what we've accomplished again tonight, but realizing, man, we got to pour everything into getting our bodies right, our minds right, getting healthy as quick as we can here, getting the game plan in order, and go back to work.
To be an undefeated Power 5 champion in Washington, boy, there are a lot of doubters in this game. A lot of people picking the Texas Longhorns to win this one, as not a lot of folks believed in Washington, thought that maybe they were finally going to meet their match against Texas last night. And I can understand why people make that argument. He mentioned the thoughts around this team since that Oregon game, where, again, Oregon ends up missing the field goal late. They failed to convert on a couple of 4th and goal situations that would have potentially led to points. Like, Washington escaped that game. And then in the games after that, Arizona State beat them by 8. Stanford, the score looks better because of a late score there, but Stanford was driving with the opportunity to maybe take the lead in the late stages of that game against Washington. A Utah team that was down, obviously Cam Rising at quarterback. They just barely squeaked by Oregon State. Had to beat Wazoo on the last-second field goal in the Apple Cup. Like, this team has survived so many close scares. I think a lot of people were naturally inclined to think, well, there's no way they're going to be able to beat a high-caliber opponent like a Texas, especially with how potent they are on offense and how good they were on defense, by just escaping by the skin of their teeth. And lo and behold, they did it again. So many people counted them out when they played the Pac-12 championship game a couple weeks ago against Oregon. It's like, well, Oregon shot themselves in the foot in that game up in Seattle a couple months back. Surely they'll right the ship. Washington held on. 3-point win there. 6-point win last night against Texas. It does not matter how you win these games. Winning is what matters at the end of the day. That's what Washington's done. And look, they're going to go into the national championship game against Michigan as a 4.5-point dog. Michigan's defense is the reason for that. I'll tell you right now, I'm picking Washington. I think they can do it. Why not? They've proven it up to this point. Michael Penix Jr., I know he's second in the Heisman voting to Jaden Daniels, might be the best quarterback in the country. Showed you last night, 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yes, he does have a great embarrassment of riches at wide receiver, but that's besides the point. He's a great quarterback. He steps up in clutch situations and makes things happen. Did it again last night. Kalen DeBoer, what a heck of a start to his tenure as Washington's head coach. 2 seasons. 2 seasons. They are, 26-2? Went 11-2 last year. Or 25-2, I guess. 25-2. And go to the national championship in year number 2. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. I'm excited for Monday night. I think it's going to be a very good matchup. And a good dynamic. A high-flying offense that lives on explosive plays and a gritty, hard-nosed, punch-in-the-mouth defense that Michigan brings to the table. I know a lot of people are not as excited because there's not an SEC team featured in it for the first time in 10 years since Ohio State and Oregon played for the national championship in the first year of the college football playoff semifinal. But I think we're going to get treated to a darn good national championship. The final one of the 14 playoff era before we divulge into the chaos of 12 teams and first-round buys and all that kind of stuff next year. I've said it all season long. Appreciate what you're watching this year in college football because it's going to be the last for a lot of things, including the last hurrah for the Pac-12. And I thought it was funny George Kleinkoff standing on the sidelines last night as if he's actually accomplished anything as the Pac-12 commissioner. But he at least gets to see one of his teams, while they're still one of his teams, play for a national championship on Monday night out there in Houston. You almost feel like this being a Big Ten Pac-12 matchup, the final one ever, you almost wish they could relocate to the Rose Bowl, right? Because that's just fitting. That's right. With what the Rose Bowl is from a traditional standpoint of what the matchup always was for years and years, you almost kind of wish these two teams could square off one last time in Pasadena, but that's not going to happen. NRG Stadium going to be the host for the national championship game, and I feel like it should be a good one. Want to be excited for, and plenty of time between now and then to break down that matchup as we get closer to it on Monday night. At least they kick that thing off at 7:30, really like 7:45. But that's a whole lot better than like 9:15 last night with the Sugar Bowl. I'll get to your Firehouse Subs text of the hour coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo until 3. Terry Ford out today here on The Game and the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo until 3, reacting to all things from yesterday's college football playoff semifinals. It is time for the Firehouse Subs text of the hour. Scott weighs in and says they probably play the Rose Bowl at that time because of the parade and all the fans are at the parade probably, so 2 o'clock their time is probably as early as they can do it. I understand why they have the kickoff time that they do, 2 o'clock local time, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, but at some point, powers that be in college football should put their foot down and say, okay, if you want to be a part of our playoff, you're going to have to conform like every other bowl game does. You are not as special as you think you are, Rose Bowl. If that means moving the parade up, if that means doing something else, so be it. But it is ridiculous to kick off game number 1. Or you know what? If we're going to do that, then that should be the late game. Kick the late game off at 5 o'clock, wraps up at 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever it may be, and then that's it for the night. Play the other semifinal game or whatever it may be at noon or 1 o'clock or whatever. Have 2 games running concurrently. I don't know, but we should not be up till 1 a.m. watching the conclusion of the semifinal games. And again, this is first world problems. I work in sports, so it's my job to stay up and watch these games, and I could be doing a lot worse things with my time. But I think about this from the context of people that have to go to other jobs, have to go to school, all that kind of stuff. It's ridiculous to ask them to stay up this late to watch the conclusion of these playoff games. And just kind of perusing through, next year we have the 12-team college football playoff, and next year and the year after, the Rose Bowl will be a part of quarterfinal games. So for those that may not be as fresh on this, 12-team playoff next year. The weekend before Christmas, you'll have your first-round games, which feature seeds 5 through 12, played at campus sites. The winners of those games will go on to meet the top 4 seeds in the respective quarterfinal games, and one of those being the Rose Bowl next year. And then the winners of those games will go to the semifinal games, which will be on the second weekend of January. Still bowl games, which is going to feel kind of weird playing like the, the Orange Bowl on January the 10th or whatever it may be. But that's the new era of college football they're going to. We have to accept it. We have to deal with it because that's just what it's going to be. But I'm thinking about this from the context of next year because they're going to have one game played on New Year's Eve. Then you're going to have your normal, 5 o'clock Rose Bowl, I guess 9 o'clock Sugar Bowl, and like the Peach Bowl kicking off at noon or something like that, theoretically, most likely. That's how I'm thinking about it off the top of my head. But again, it's ridiculous that the Rose Bowl just has so much control. And this isn't a new thing. Even when they were trying to nail down the college football playoff 12-team format, the Rose Bowl was the one holdout on all this because they were trying to make sure they held on to that traditional 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time start. It's got so many problems. There's a reason that they didn't want to be part of the Bowl Alliance or in the original BCS back in the day because they didn't want to shake themselves from what was then the Pac-10 Big Ten matchup. So they didn't get to be a part of the national championship rotation, which prevented several years of having number 1 and number 2 play for the national championship because one of those teams is going to the Rose Bowl. Like, they're so, I love tradition, but so much tradition has gone out the window in college football. It seems so ridiculous to me. Like, this is the one thing that we're still trying to hang on to. Like, join or die. You know what I mean? Like, embrace it or fall off. This is the new age college football. We've thrown so much tradition out the window. Why can't we throw out the 5 o'clock? I'm asking them to move it up an hour. It's not like I'm asking them to play the game at 9 in the morning local time or something like that. Moving up an hour, move the parade up an hour, whatever it may be. Like, I don't feel like it's that much of an ask, but apparently with the folks out there at the Tournament of Roses parade and all that kind of stuff, I guess it is. So next year, be prepared for the quarterfinals to exist long into the early morning hours of January the 2nd as well. But if I'm thinking off the top of my head, next year New Year's Day will be on a Wednesday because I say next year. Yes, next year New Year's Day will be on a Wednesday because of the leap year. So that means the late game will creep over into the early morning hours of Thursday, I guess. Which middle of the week, that might make it even worse. I don't know. But it's what I have to deal with, unfortunately. Again, hopefully you made it all the way to the end of the game. like I did last night. And at least we were treated to a good game. So if you stayed up for it, you at least got to see a game that came all the way down to the wire, and one that I thought maybe Texas was going to pull the ultimate upset, and Washington was going to have to walk back to or fly back to Seattle with, their dreams crushed. They didn't do that. They did just enough defensively to hold off Texas driving down the field there at the very last second to punch their ticket to the national championship game, taking on Michigan coming up on Monday night, 7:30 kickoff out at NRG Stadium. So at least that game kicks off early. It still should be on Saturday night because college football is Saturday sport, not a Monday sport. But I'll take that L for now. At least the game kicks off early enough. 1 hour down, 2 more hours to go. We'll talk plenty more about the college football playoff and other things happening around the bowls from what we saw over the course of these past couple weeks. Going to dive into some Gamecock stuff as we did have some movement in the transfer portal for the Gamecocks over the little bit of a Christmas break that we had for a couple days. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game on the 107.5 The Game app going until 3. 1 o'clock. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. It is time for football, and more football in the halftime show. Again, flying solo until 3. Terry Ford out today with a little bit of sickness. We'll hopefully get him back at some point this week and hear his recap of everything that he saw in the college football playoff and bowl season as well. And again, I'll get to plenty more of that as the show goes along. But we did have some activity in the transfer portal for South Carolina over the course of the Christmas holiday. And, you know, the portal activity slows down as the weeks go by, where you have, you know, the swarm of guys jumping in the portal and announcing where they're going in those first couple weeks. But as you get a little bit deeper into it, and today is actually the end of the first little window for the transfer portal, contact period reopening tomorrow, and then there'll be the additional period of time for the teams that were in the playoff and everything like that for those guys to jump at the portal. Now, you can still add guys in the portal through all this, but the window of entering the portal for regular teams is closing for at least this cycle. And last week, just after Christmas, Stone Blanton, linebacker for the Gamecocks, did throw his name to the transfer portal as he is seeking opportunities to continue his career elsewhere. And this one definitely a little surprising. He kind of falls into that same category of a Juice Wells. Mario Anderson is in guys that were productive, obviously in starting roles, that would have had those same starting roles in 2024. Now Stone Blanton was not perfect. Certainly, he had his issues, with pass coverage and stuff like that. But seemed to be coming along, and again would have had another starting role in this team in 2024, but has instead decided to enter the transfer portal. And there can be a litany of reasons for this. And I always say this about guys when it comes to them entering the transfer portal is they don't give us press conferences. They don't owe us an explanation. You can, speculate however you want in terms of what their reasons are for entering the transfer portal. But when you look at Stone Blanton, he's a kid from Mississippi, and it certainly could be him wanting to go back and play closer to home. And when you look at his recruiting, ultimately landing on South Carolina, Mississippi State and Ole Miss were major players in trying to land him as an in-state kid. And you can look at a team like Ole Miss that is obviously killing it in the transfer portal right now, and a team that seems destined to be in the mix for the playoff conversation next year was, hey, maybe that's a place that he wants to go. Mississippi State, again, one of the heavy pursuers of him when it came to recruiting him out of high school. They are looking to replace one of the best linebackers in all the SEC, Nathaniel Wilson, somebody that we saw up close and personal when Mississippi State came to town earlier on this past season. Jet Johnson should be returning for them at the other linebacker spot, but there's an opportunity for Stone Blanton, who, again, is already used to and up to speed when it comes to the SEC, to potentially slot in and play at a place like Mississippi State. Again, this is all speculation at this point in time. There could be other schools on his radar. That's all we know as of right now. And again, here's somebody that would have been starting for South Carolina again in 2024. And you hate to lose him, obviously. You do feel like you have a decent amount of depth in the linebacker room, but this probably adds another priority in the transfer portal, whether it be in this next upcoming weeks or maybe after the spring, which kind of assess the guys that you have on campus of maybe adding another piece, especially if South Carolina is going to be running more of a base 3-3-5 defense, which we saw them implement a little bit more towards the end of last season, which proved to be pretty successful. And we saw, guys like Ben Martin Scott and Jerron Willis come on strong once they started playing in that type of defense. But Debo Williams coming back, already announced, signed with Garnet Trust, all that kind of stuff. So he's locked in for next year. Ben Martin Scott come back as well. Pup Howard, somebody that maybe did not wow as much as many people would have maybe thought, given all the hype that he had coming into the year as a true freshman. He got out there and played plenty, but maybe didn't have as much of an impact as people would have thought. Here's an opportunity for him to step up in year number 2. And again, Jerron Willis, the transfer from Ole Miss, who again really thrived in that 3-5 defense once that became a little bit more of the feature package for South Carolina in the last couple games of the season. And then you welcome into true freshman in Wendell Gregory and Fred Johnson, two highly touted guys themselves. We talked to Wendell Gregory just a couple weeks ago on early signing day. Two guys are going to come in there and push for some playing time on the field as well. So again, it's not completely detrimental to your linebacker room that you lose a guy like Stone Blanton, but the experience is worth something there. And again, how does South Carolina address this in the transfer portal? We will certainly have to see who they look at and who they potentially bring in over the course of the next couple weeks and months, if that is indeed what they do in terms of the transfer portal. Other spots that they're looking at in the portal obviously include offensive line. And especially when you talk about Jalen Nichols, who decided to jump into the transfer portal a couple weeks back, that has a body of somebody that, while yes, he missed this entire season with injury, a lot of experience, and it would have factored into one of your starting roles at one of those tackle spots, assuming he was going to be at full health when the 2024 season rolls around. So now you go out there continuing to search to maybe bring in that extra body, and a guy in just talking about Mississippi State a few minutes ago with, Stone Blanton as possibly being a landing spot for him. You look at Percy Lewis, who's in the transfer portal and one of the more sought after offensive line prospects, who did name South Carolina as one of his 8 finalists when it comes to the transfer portal. The other ones being Arkansas, Auburn, Cal, FSU, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Memphis, in addition to South Carolina, as potential landing spots for him. And when you look at not only the fact that he's already played in the SEC at left tackle, so it's not like he's going to be shell-shocked coming in here and playing against the tough opponents South Carolina has on their schedule in 2024. He's got great size. 6'8", 345 pounds. Like, if you're crafting an ideal offensive lineman in the SEC, maybe a little bit lighter as far as the weight goes, maybe somewhere around the 310, 320 range, just a little bit more nimble, a little bit more athletic. But, 6'8", 345, that's pretty darn good. And that's what you see at the Alabamas. That's what you see at the Georgias. That's what you're starting to see at South Carolina. We look at, the Josiah Thompsons, Cam Pringles, guys like that just have this massive size that, can make a difference in a physical conference like the SEC. His performance this year, very solid. Only allowed 6 pressures this entire season and 1 lone sack in Mississippi State's game against Alabama. So, again, at least maybe one more body in the offensive line room, and Percy Lewis would certainly fit that bill. And, again, very sought after, so it's not going to be a walk in the park for South Carolina to land him, but somebody to keep an eye on as the days and weeks end up going by. And we've talked so much about the wide receiver room, and that being another place that South Carolina wants to continue to add depth to. And while it seemed like a couple weeks back that your slot position was nailed down pretty well, where you have Brown from Coastal Carolina coming in, and then it seemed that Jaden McGowan was going to maybe occupy that second slot position at transfer coming in from Vanderbilt. And look, he could do a lot of other things on offense as well, not just line up in the slot, but you lose him, goes to Boston College instead, flips his commitment there. So adding at least one more, I'd say probably 2 more pieces in the wide receiver room, the latest of which potentially being Amari Huggins-Bryce, who is a local kid from Dillon. He's a junior, played 3 seasons at Louisville so far, collecting over 1,100 yards of through the air and 10 total touchdowns in his 3 seasons there. Now, he's not listed as an official visitor as of yet, but they are looking to get him on campus soon and potentially see if he can come and contribute to the South Carolina team in 2024. I definitely feel like you would ideally like to have somebody with a little bit more size, maybe 6'2", 6'3", that you can use on more of the outside, because as of right now, South Carolina does not have that bona fide experienced guy on the outside when it comes to wide receiver. Now, that doesn't mean that a guy like Nick Harper can't step up in year number 2. You'd love to see it, obviously, but there's no guarantee on that. You would love to bring in a guy that's played 2 and 3 seasons, played a lot of snaps out wide, starting as in a starting role and all that kind of stuff. And South Carolina just does not have that on their roster right now, but that's something to keep an eye on what they're going to ultimately address in the transfer portal, which they can still do even if they bring in Huggins Bryce as potentially another slot guy, which, hey, that's a very important position too. Nothing to overlook. But I think a lot of people are collectively waiting for them to ultimately land somebody out of the portal to play one of those wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 type of roles, primarily lining up out wide as opposed to in the slot, which is what Mari Huggins Bryce did for the majority of the time, almost all the time, in his time over at Louisville. Somebody keep an eye on. Again, no official visit scheduled as of yet. Percy Lewis is scheduled to be here on 5th, I believe. And seeing what he could potentially do as another ad for South Carolina in the transfer portal. The quarterback spot, something else that we've talked about ad nauseum about which way South Carolina could potentially go in the transfer portal. Chris Clark, our guy from Gamecock Central, put up an interesting article the other day about some potential names that South Carolina could be looking at in terms of future portal targets and where they might slot in with this South Carolina team. We'll take a look at some of those names and assess who might be a good fit for the Gamecocks coming up. It is the halftime show. I'm Tyler Head along with you on this Tuesday, January the 2nd, here on The Game on the 107.5 The Game app. Men's basketball has wrapped up its non-conference play at 12-1 after defeating Florida A&M this past Saturday at Colonial Life Arena. They now get set to start SEC conference play, and they'll be welcoming in Mississippi State on Saturday afternoon. Tip-off for that game coming at 12 o'clock. You'll be able to listen to pregame coverage starting right here on The Game that morning at 11:30. It's going to be step-up competition. We're going to learn a lot about Lamont Paris and company as we get into the SEC play because you've got tough competition, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, all very early on in the season, and things tipping off with a very good defensive team in Mississippi State. Again, Saturday at 12 o'clock right here on The Game, pregame coverage starting at 11:30, and we'll see if Lamont Paris and company can get conference play started off on the right foot. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you again, flying solo until 3. Terry Ford out today, feeling a little bit under the weather. We'll see if we can get him back in here tomorrow. I do want to correct one thing from a moment ago just for the break there. It is actually Amari Huggins-Bryce that is scheduled for a visit later on this week, not Percy Lewis. Percy Lewis, again, the offensive lineman in the transfer portal that South Carolina is one of his 8 finalists, but they are still working to get him to come for an official visit once the contact period reopens coming up tomorrow. But again, Louisville wide receiver Amari Huggins-Bryce is scheduled to come to campus on the 5th later on this week for his official visit. So we'll keep tabs on that and see if he ultimately decides to join the Gamecocks and their wide receiver room. The one spot that we've, I don't want to say talked about more than any other, but one that's been a frequent point of conversation is quarterback. And with Spencer Rattler heading off to the NFL, with the other guys entering the transfer portal, you're left with a little bit more of a bare bones room than you would certainly like to have. Again, we naturally kind of assuming that Lenore Sellers will be your starter in 2024, based on all the indications that we've gotten up to this point. Dante Reno obviously coming in as a true freshman and expected to be, maybe the future of the quarterback room on down the line. And Luke Doty kind of being an in-between spot right now between wide receiver and quarterback. So ideally, you would like to add at least one more body to that room and make you feel a little bit better about the depth of what you have there. And it seemed like a couple weeks ago before Christmas that South Carolina had everything lined up perfectly with an ideal candidate, ideal scenario with A.J. Swan, who was, by all indications, actually committed to South Carolina. Coach Beamer put out the welcome home, the whole 9 yards, and then at the last second ends up flipping to LSU, where he theoretically maybe thinks he has a better shot at starting. I would be hesitant on that. If you saw Garrett Nussmeier and the way that he played yesterday in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Wisconsin, I feel like, and I go back to when he started played in the SEC championship game in relief of an injured Jaden Daniels a season ago. You see the promise for him. You see a reason for LSU fans to be excited about him being the potential future of their program. He threw for 395 and 3 touchdowns yesterday with the 1 interception. Like, that's going to be a tough guy to beat. But for whatever reason, A.J. Swan feels like that's his better opportunity to go in there and maybe become the starter. So he walks away from the South Carolina commitment, goes to LSU, and now South Carolina is back to the drawing board in terms of who they're looking at in the transfer portal. And Chris Clark the other day put out the story about potential options that South Carolina looks at with the transfer portal. One of them being a name you might be familiar with, that being Robbie Ashford, somebody that has spent the past couple years at Auburn and originally started out his career at Oregon and was kind of thought to maybe be the guy that was going to take the reins this year over Peyton Thorne. Of course, Hugh Freeze brings in Peyton Thorne from Michigan State, but Thorne struggled, and Robbie Ashford got his opportunities. He went out there and played, but just could not do enough to take over the offense. Let's see. His passing numbers this year, 1,600 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Did end up running for 710 yards and 7 touchdowns as well, but just not quite enough to claim that starting role. Now, I look at this from the standpoint of having a very similar skill set to what Lenore Sellers brings to the table. And ideally in your backup quarterback, you want to be able to run a similar type of offense to what your starter does. And a guy like Robbie Ashford would probably certainly fit that bill. Tate Rodemaker, a name that has been in more headlines recently with college football because he took over, obviously, in the place of Jordan Travis after his injury against North Alabama late in the season for Florida State. started the game against Florida, and they found their way to win. Was injured, could not play in the ACC championship game, and then entered the transfer portal prior to Florida State playing in their bowl game against Georgia. Now, he's somebody that was very much seen in a limited role because we only got to see him in 2 games this year through 510 yards, 5 touchdowns. So still a lot of questions about him, but I would assume if he is going to be searching for a new home in the transfer portal, he's probably going to be looking at somewhere where he can go and start. I don't know if South Carolina would be as enticing to him, but we will certainly see there. Then a couple other names with Chandler Morris, who, of course, the son of former Arkansas head coach and Clemson OC Chad Morris, transfer from TCU, and then Zion Chris from Louisiana. Now, Chris is a little bit more of the, again, kind of dual threat type. Ran for 492 yards and 6 touchdowns while throwing for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns this past season. So kind of fitting that mold of what Lenore Sellers does, which, again, I feel like is more ideal in what you're looking for in a backup quarterback. And look, if South Carolina can't land somebody in the transfer portal, it's not the end of the world. Again, you have Luke Doty, and he could continue to serve as your viable backup, and he's going to have his opportunity to fight for the starting job as well. And Beamer talked about this the other week in his press conference. It really seemed like, when you kind of read between the lines of what he's saying, that they would rather him focus a little bit more on being a wide receiver, because that's probably the area where he can help the team more than anything else. And that's not knocking his abilities as a quarterback, but it seems like he's not at that level to be trusted enough as a starter. And again, if you would have felt confident in Luke Doty's abilities a couple of seasons ago, and I know he dealt with injuries, but you wouldn't have brought in Spencer Rattler. So can he be that in case of emergency break glass quarterback? He can. But the ideal scenario would be go out and get somebody to where he doesn't have to be that guy. And then that way you're not having to turn over to, in a worst case scenario, a true freshman Dante Reno should the other couple guys get hurt. So it's a work in progress. Again, the contact period opens up once again starting tomorrow, so we'll see if South Carolina can get another quarterback on campus. It seemed like the Malik Murphy stuff's kind of coming to win, obviously. And South Carolina's still searching for who can fill out that quarterback room with another body in the transfer portal. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see what happens and what South Carolina ultimately decides to do as we get rolling here in the new year and continuing to roll along with the transfer portal. Coming up, want to jump into the NFL. It was a very interesting weekend as the NFL season winds down to a close because of the college football playoff semifinals. Yesterday, Monday Night Football got moved to Saturday night, and with an entire nation watching, the NFL made themselves look foolish once again. We'll dive into that coming up, as well as other things going on around the world of football as the halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game and the 107.5 The Game app.
Two people can't report. I don't want to talk about it, all right? I explain everything pregame to a T. Okay, I did that. 70 reported, 58 didn't, or 68 didn't. We threw it to 68. That was the explanation.
Welcome back in. It is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game. That was the voice of Dan Campbell, head coach of the Detroit Lions, on what was a controversial end to Saturday night's contest between the Lions and the Cowboys. And with, again, yesterday you had the college football playoff semifinals. So ESPN shifted Monday Night Football to Saturday night, and that's why there was no bowl games after the Orange Bowl between Georgia and Florida State. And trust me, I'll get to that game here in a little bit. So you had this game between the Lions and the Cowboys, two of the best teams in the NFL this season. A lot on the line for both teams, obviously fighting for their playoff positioning. And the Lions make a drive down the field, get a touchdown at the very end, and Dan Campbell, in very Dan Campbell fashion, instead of electing to kick the extra point to tie the game up, attempts to go for two. Jared Goff finds Taylor Decker for seemingly the two-point conversion to take the lead. And then it gets called back for illegal touching because allegedly Taylor Decker had not reported himself eligible to head referee Brad Allen before that play took place. I've said this many times. If you've listened to me on here the game for a while, I've been pretty steadfast in my stance when it comes to officiating. Look, I don't think there's a grand conspiracy. I don't think there's a fix in. I don't think that referees are getting handed envelopes full of money before the game to make sure this team wins and this team doesn't. If you believe that's your own opinion, you're entitled to it. But I don't believe that. I just think, generally speaking, referees can be really bad at their jobs sometimes. And the NFL, that is especially true. When we saw that rear its ugly head on Saturday night. Again, I know it's more glaring when you're playing the Cowboys, but I don't think the NFL was trying to fix the game for the Cowboys or anything like that. I just think this officiating crew screwed up. Here's Taylor Decker, the offensive lineman for the Lions, talking about what he said was reporting eligible prior to the play.
Tell me anything after the play. All I really want to say on it, just so I don't get myself into trouble, is, I did exactly what Coach told me to do, and went to the ref, set a report, and I don't know. And, it was my understanding, too, that, Dan brings up the possibility of those sorts of plays pregame, so I did what I was told to do, did how we did it in practice all week, and that's probably all I'm really going to touch on with that.
So if you go back and listen to right before this play happens, you hear Brad Allen get on the microphone and report number 70 for Detroit reporting is eligible. Number 70 is Dan Skipper, their tackle, who was also on the field for that play. But he was covered up. He was not on the end of the line of scrimmage for this play. He was not in a spot to be able to catch pass. Taylor Decker on the left side of the line was. Now it's like, okay, well, did Taylor Decker forget to report? Well, of course, the investigators on Twitter do what they do after the game, and this video surfaces right before this play happens of Taylor Decker, number 68, as well as another offensive lineman, going up to Brad Allen and looking him in the face. We can't hear what they say, obviously, but you imagine that he's telling him he's reporting eligible. Brad Allen, in his, because they do a one-on-one pool with an official and one member of the media after the game, said that he was told by number 70, which is Dan Skipper, that he was eligible. But upon this video, Dan Skipper's 10 feet behind Taylor Decker. So it appears Brad Allen just misunderstood who he was talking to despite looking right at him. And this is the thing that aggravates me. You have these officials on TV that are the consultants for plays, stuff like that. John Perry is on the ESPN broadcast crew, and Scott Van Pelt, after the game on SportsCenter, was asking John Perry, like, whose responsibility is this? And John Perry said it's on the player to make sure the referee hears them correctly. How ridiculous is that? If I'm Taylor Decker and I go up and tell Brad Allen, hey, I'm reporting eligible for this play, that should be all that needs to take place. If Brad Allen is looking at me and the big 6'8" I have in my chest, I shouldn't need to go further. That should be it. But because of that, because of this ineptitude, which Brad Allen and his crew have caused many screw-ups this season, that the Chiefs-Packers game on Monday Night Football a couple weeks ago where the blatant pass interference doesn't get called at the end of the game, they've screwed up things before. And once again screw this up. And cost the Lions this game, which affects their playoff seeding. And it's being reported that, this crew is being downgraded for the potential of playing a postseason or officiating for the postseason. That's not enough for me. There needs to be legitimate consequences for officiating crews that screw up in any game, quite frankly. And look, the fact that this game was on national television, being the only game on between two high-profile teams, puts it in more of a spotlight. But I don't care if this was a 1 o'clock game between the 2-win Panthers and the, 7-win Bears. Like, it should still be treated the same way because it's ineptitude on the part of the officials. For those that don't know, officials in the NFL are not full-time employees. They are part-time. They all have other jobs they do during the week, and then they officiate games on the weekends. That's not good enough for me. I need officials as full-time employees of the NFL. And don't tell me the NFL doesn't have money, because they certainly do. These officials get paid handsomely enough being part-timers. I need officials that are dedicated 365 days a year to being NFL officials, where from August until February, they are working officiating games. And then in the offseason, maybe they go and officiate the UFL in the spring to keep themselves sharp, and are in camps throughout the summer and all this stuff. And in their free time, they're reading the rule book backwards and forwards to make sure they get things right. We need better accountability because the officiating in the NFL is terrible. And again, I'm not in the contingent. I don't put on the tinfoil hat and think that they're out to screw my team or hurt my team or whatever it may be. I just think that officiating in the NFL is generally bad. And it is hurting the game of football itself. Because instead of talking about what was a highly entertaining game between two of the best teams in the NFL, we were talking about the officials screwing something up. And that's been a common theme this entire season. And we have the technology. We have social media. We can go back and replay these things and have these conversations. It is put in the spotlight. And to me, and I go back to a couple weeks ago with the Kadarius Toney offside penalty, which that one was legit. Like, that actually happened. Kadarius Toney was offsides. I'm not saying the referees got that one wrong. But Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid came out in criticism of the officials. And they were fined because of it, because they spoke out against them. If players and coaches can be fined for speaking out for what they believe is ineptitude from the officials, officials should be fined too in reference to screwing things up, because there doesn't seem to be that disincentivization of not doing your job correctly. Now, yeah, they may not get a postseason assignment, but Brad Allen and his crew are going to make the same amount of money at the end of this season because they get paid in one lump sum, whether they officiate correctly or not. And that, to me, is not good enough. There needs to be a level of accountability with NFL officials. This is in the NFL, against all sports as a whole. There should always be accountability for the officials to go out there and have the incentive to do their job to the best of their abilities. Now, if you're trying to make them full-time employees, that's easier said than done because you have the officials union and all that kind of stuff. Remember the lockout from 2011 or 2012, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not something that's going to change overnight, but I'm hoping these glaring issues with officiating can be addressed in the near future. And I'm pointing the finger right at Roger Goodell. And he's going to have his state of the sport address before the Super Bowl, the days before, whatever it may be. These questions are going to be asked. And he better have a good answer. You know, a couple weeks back, they asked something to the effect, and I think it was after the Chiefs-Packers game where that screw up with the pass interference happened, where he's like, well, you know, they're working their hardest to get it right. Well, that's not a good enough answer for me. I need some accountability, and I need some ideas of how to make this better. Because, again, you're talking about the top level of football in the world. And our conversations coming away from these games should be about what happens on the field with the players, the results of games, all this kind of stuff. We shouldn't be having a week in, week out conversation about the officials screwing something up. Are bad calls going to happen? Yes. It's going to happen. Every now and then, nobody can be 100% perfect. But the fact that this keeps becoming a recurring theme in big games like this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And again, I get it. It's easier said than done. It's going to take time. But I need to know that the NFL is actively working towards it. I don't need lip service like, well, we're investigating the matter and blah, 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 blah. No, tell me what you're going to do to fix this, to make it better. And I get it. The NFL is a money printing machine, and whether the officiating is good or bad, we're all zombies to this. We're going to tune in no matter what. And maybe that's our faults. But we as fans, players as players, and coaches as coaches, deserve better than the lackluster officiating we're getting in the NFL. And it seems to be more present than ever this season. And I just want something done about it. That's all I ask. We'll wrap up hour number 2, get to another Firehouse Subs text of the hour as the halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head, along with you, going until 3 here on The Game, the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head going with you until 3. Again, Terry Ford out a little bit sick today. Hopefully get him back here in studio tomorrow. I'm happy to report, we'll get to the Firehouse Subs text of the hour in just a moment. Our guy Elijah says we are officially up and rolling with the Game TV on YouTube. You can search the Game TV, or you can go to our Twitter at 1075 The Game, and you can see the link to click. Simple as that. You can watch me. I'm literally looking to the camera right now. You can watch me, watch all of our shows. The afternoon show with Jay and Elijah coming up at 3 as well tomorrow morning with the early game. You can watch us each and every day on the Game TV. Appreciate our guys over at Integrated Media coming in this morning, putting the final touches on it so you can finally see our beautiful faces as we come in here and talk all things sports each and every day, again, with the Game TV. Let's head out to the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Curtis weighs in reference to Michigan punching their ticket to the college football playoff national championship. If Michigan wins, do they eventually vacate the wins from this season? Should the committee have left them out? Just wondering your opinion. That's a bit of a loaded question. Now, is it possible that these wins could be vacated years and years down the line? Absolutely. The NCAA, though, is very slow when it comes to investigations, so I feel like if I'm spitballing, the earliest that may happen, 2029, where every player that's been a part of, and again, this is assuming Michigan maybe goes on and wins the national championship on Monday, any player that was a part of that is theoretically gone to the NFL, whatever it may be, their respective professional careers, to where it's really more of a ceremonial removing of a banner and just striking through things in the record book, which, like, I get it. It's a punishment to some degree, but is it really? Because if you're a fan of Michigan and you watch them win the Rose Bowl in overtime against Alabama and you proceed to watch them win the national championship against Washington on Monday, does the fact that there won't be a sign in Michigan Stadium that says 2023, 2024 national championship really affect you years down the line? Not really, because you saw it, you witnessed it, you experienced it. Like, to me, and we talk about the NCAA losing power as the day goes by, that's about the only thing they can really do at this point in time, is that kind of slap on the wrist. And again, I know they're investigating however long that's going to take, but I don't see anything crazy coming out of this. And again, and when you talk about the question about leaving them out, I did wonder about that with the first playoff rankings that came out right around, I think it was on Halloween night actually, where like, okay, because that was, the Connor Stallion stuff had come out like 2 weeks before. It was the center of college football conversation. Like, would the committee make a statement on Michigan at that point in time saying, hey, we don't know what's going on with this investigation. We can't in good conscience view these wins as legitimate or whatever it may be because we don't know the nature of this investigation, what's going on with Harbaugh and all that kind of stuff. The fact that they ranked them in the top 4 in their first playoff rankings told me everything I needed to know that was not going to affect anything going forward. And Boo Corrigan, the playoff chair, said so when asked about that in the first playoff rankings, like, hey, we're not viewing that, we're viewing what's happening on the field and all that kind of stuff. Could they have made a statement? Sure. You could have been looking at a potential lawsuit there, which, hey, there's enough lawsuits going around the world of college football now. What's one more, right? But it did not seem like the committee was interested in that at all, especially when you look at the fact that Michigan legitimately is one of the 4 best teams in college football this year, and they backed that up last night by beating Alabama in the Rose Bowl and punched their ticket to the national championship game. So should they have left them out? In my opinion, no. Because, again, and when you look at the season, did they need to steal signs to beat Michigan State, Rutgers, teams like that? No, they didn't. And once the Connor Stallion stuff came out and whatever signs and signals Penn State, Ohio State, Maryland, all those teams had, they would have changed them in thinking that Michigan maybe had their playbook. So you almost kind of, I don't want to say start with a clean slate. That's not 100% true, but all these teams should have changed what they were doing with the thinking that Michigan may have their signs. So I think you almost kind of start looking at it in a new way. And guess what? They continue to win. They beat Penn State. They beat Maryland. They beat Ohio State. They beat Iowa. They beat Alabama last night. Like, to me, I don't think they should have been left out. If you think differently, that's okay. But in my opinion, I'm okay with them being in. You know, sports are that much better when you have a heel. And Alabama's kind of been the natural heel for so long because they're just so darn good and always in the national championship conversation. So there were a lot of people rooting for Michigan last night because they just didn't want to see Alabama play for another national championship. But now you have the opportunity to have almost this good versus evil story play out on Monday night in Houston, where you have this Washington team that survived so many of these close games with, this great story of a head coach in Kalen DeBoer, this guy Michael Penix Jr. that's survived 6 years of college football through a litany of injuries to make it the national championship game. Then you have the Michigan team that is very easy to hate because of their controversy, because of the brashness of their head coach, because of all that ridiculous stuff about, the culture and the world against Michigan and all that kind of stuff. And I rightfully laughed at that when they were doing that, and Sherrone Moore with his emotional proclamation to Harbaugh after beating Penn State. Like, I laughed at that stuff rightfully so because it was ridiculous. But you know what? It worked. Whatever they were selling, those guys bought in. They've played well. And at this point have earned their spot in the national championship game. Now, again, in 2029, could the NCAA come in if the NCAA exists in 2029? Because there's a realistic possibility that they won't. Or at that point in time, college football could have already broken off and done its own thing to where that stuff doesn't even matter anymore. Could theoretically the NCAA come in down the line and say, you know what? That banner right there for a national championship, Big Ten championship, all that kind of stuff, you got to take that down. I think Michigan would gladly say, okay, fine, you win. Now, Harbaugh may be in the NFL again by that point in time. Who knows? I don't know. It's hard to guess right now. But I think if you told Michigan fans, guess what? You're going to win the national championship, but 5 years from now, you can't hang that banner anymore. I think they would take that. So, do I expect anything to happen? Who knows? But, again, you can't deny that Michigan's one of the best 4 teams in college football, and last night proved that by beating a very, very good Alabama team en route to go to the national championship game. One more hour to go here on the Halftime Show. We'll hit some of the headlines of 2 o'clock. Of course, coming up at 2:30, it's the greatest day in the history of the world. As the Halftime Show rolls on, Tyler Head along with you on the Game, the 107.5 The Game app, and now streaming live on the Game TV. Welcome in, hour number 3. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you going until 3. Then we'll hand over the reins to the afternoon show with Jay Phillips and Elijah Campbell, who was so darn excited that we are finally streaming on the Game TV. He had to jump in the studio and get in on this for himself. So if you tune in right now, you can see both myself and Elijah Campbell on the stream.
That's right. You get to see what our studio looks like, be able to watch us as well as listen to us, and get to check out my hair. It's a good hair day. So
you got to pull back. It's nice.
Yeah. So I had to come in. I had to come in early. I had to flex a little bit, get good lighting, mess with the lights in here a little bit, so I can be seen.
Well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well.
It's January the 2nd, and I've been thinking it's Monday all day, but it's not. It's Tuesday. So
the entire day.
Week progressing along faster than usual, which is nice. Did you make it to the end of the Sugar Bowl last night?
I did. Barely. And the fact that, Texas making that mad comeback at the end was a little boost of adrenaline to keep me up. That was, like a little bit of caffeine. But it was, I listened to you on the way into, it's way too late. That was, the game should never be ending at 1 o'clock.
Right. So watching the game last night, and my wife was already like in bed asleep, and I'm sitting in front of the TV just like praying Washington just runs the clock out. Like, let's get this thing over with. Let's move on and all that kind of stuff. And I forget which play it was, but I think when Texas scored their last touchdown, I just went, "Are you freaking kidding me?" really loud. And she woke up. She's like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Nothing. This game's just not going to end anytime soon." And
this game could potentially go to overtime or something like that.
Dillon Johnson with the injury, and that added 30 more seconds to the clock. And it just I was like, is Washington about to blow this? Are they really about to have this collapse in the final minute of the playoff semifinal? It didn't happen, thankfully for them. But man, it sure looked like it was going that way.
I mean, and Quinn Ewers was moving. They were moving the ball pretty well too. And Texas moved the ball well, for the most part during the game. It had a couple turnovers that really killed them. But never do you see an instance where they, a team kicks a field goal to make it a one-score game and then not get the onside kick and usually end up coming back and winning. Usually the not recovering the onside kick is the kiss of death.
Sure. And I understand Washington trying to get the first down to completely ice it away, but
because that completely ends it. That gives them zero chance of getting the ball back. Yeah, I get it.
But man, if there's one thing we've learned this year in college football, just kneel it.
Yeah.
Just sit it out, and you would have been giving them the ball back with like 15 seconds to go and having to go 90 yards. I don't know Washington's pass defense isn't great, but I'm going to take my chances on that defense to be able to hold them off for that long.
It would have taken like a Minneapolis Miracle type thing to end up losing it at that point, And I'm with you. Like in the moment, I wasn't thinking much of it because I'm like, oh wow, Dillon Johnson breaks through here on the second or third down run and finito, game's over.
But talk about an effect from Monday night. If they don't have him,
that's big.
How much that affects that offense. Big implications there. Mm-hmm. Washington obviously ends up holding on. I'm glad you're in here though, because talking about the headlines, this kind of gets lost in everything that happened with semifinals. Tennessee played their bowl game yesterday.
Yep.
The Citrus Bowl against Iowa. Nico
favorite
got his first start. The Nico for Heisman campaign probably off and running already for 2024 because he looked very solid in his debut. But you're playing Iowa, right? Mm-hmm. Iowa, great defense, great special teams, offense, couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. Rarely do I look at a game where a team is leading by only 14 points at halftime and say there's no way the other team is going to come back. But when Tennessee had a 14-0 lead on Iowa yesterday, I'm like, yeah, there's no way they're coming back.
Yeah, a 14-0 lead against Iowa feels like you're up 4-0 because their offensive ineptitude is pathetic. And I thought it was so funny because they benched Deacon Hill early in the fourth quarter, and they had this true freshman quarterback come in, and he scrambles for like 3 first downs, gets them in the red zone, right? And they're down like what, 28-0, and the fans are standing out there getting excited, and it's like we might not get shut out. And then they ended up going for it on fourth down, didn't get it because while the kid had, like 38 yards on the drive rushing, he could not complete a pass. The theme for the year for Iowa, not being able to complete a pass.
There's something to be said about a coach that refuses to change anything about his philosophy. Brian Ferentz, for not just this year, but the years he's been the offensive coordinator, because they've routinely been at the bottom of college football in every statistical category, has stayed true to himself. And in true Brian Ferentz fashion, they backed up 2 shutouts with less than 200 yards of offense to round out the year.
I mean, I always respect commitment to the bit, and there's not somebody that's committed to the bit, even at his expense, maybe more so than Brian Ferentz. I mean, it was like the play calling wasn't good. The offense clearly have no weapons, but That's a team that's played multiple games in a month span and has not scored a point since November.
Yep, I know.
I mean, that walk-off field goal against Nebraska was the last point they would score all season long, and they played 2 more games.
You know what's funny is they're going to come out and run the air raid next year, and we're not going to know what to do with ourselves.
Well, the world might end, I guess, at that point. It's a sign of the apocalypse is when Iowa's airing it out and scoring points. I don't know if Kirk Ferentz would like that. I think him out of his own moral compass could not handle scoring 40 points in a football game.
Well, Torrey Taylor's gone. He's going on to the NFL as perhaps one of the greatest college football punters of all time. So they're going to have to go back to the drawing board when it comes to punting. So they're not going to be able to rely on that the way they were this year. But it's kind of funny because we put so much on Brian Ferentz, but like, even before he was the offensive coordinator there, Iowa still existed the same kind of way on offense. Like, I'm not expecting anything drastically different next year. Maybe they throw the ball a little bit more, but whoever comes in as their offensive coordinator is probably going to be pretty status quo with what they've been for the past 24, 25 years under Kirk Ferentz.
Well, because, who's the guy that's going to be making that decision on who the next offensive coordinator is? Kirk Ferentz. I'm sure that aligning on offensive strategy and game plan is going to be a big part of that discussion. And I'm sure the minute the word total yards or maybe yards per play comes out of this prospective coordinator's mouth is going to be the second that Ferentz shuts it down and says, you know what, good talk. Don't call us, we'll call you. Have a great day.
The one question in the interview, how do you feel about the wing tee? I love it. You're hired.
You're hired, yes. Do you like the triple option? Do you like watching football pre-1970? All right, you're our guy.
Yeah, I know it's crazy, but congratulations, Tennessee, for that. Had what might be outside of the playoff games, one of the more entertaining bowl games of all of bowl season between LSU and Wisconsin yesterday. And if you need any indication on how bad LSU's defense was this year, Tanner Mordecai threw for 378 yards and 3 touchdowns. That shouldn't happen, but it did. And LSU barely escaped 35-31.
Wisconsin hadn't been doing that to anybody all year, being able to sling it around the yard. And I know that's what they wanted to do when Luke Fickell joined Wisconsin. He brought some help over from SMU, the offensive coordinator, and obviously that's where Mordecai came from as well. And they slung it all over the yard. And it's like, oh, was this a new look? Wisconsin is Wisconsin. Finally getting into the 21st century a little bit with passing offenses. It never materialized. Mordecai had a bad year and was hurt, so it was like a double whammy. And then he comes out in the bowl game, and because LSU is LSU, he looked like he did last year when he was at Southern Methodist. So it's that part to me was the funniest part. It's like, oh, well, the best elixir to fix your passing game is just to play that LSU secondary.
Hitting some other headlines here. We'll jump to the NFL real quick. Obviously getting set for the final weekend of the NFL's regular season. This could be the final weekend of Bill Belichick coaching in New England. They'll be taking on the Jets this weekend. Headline here from ESPN, Bill Belichick focused on the Jets, not on job security, and I can just see him now saying we're focused on New York, not focused on anything else. But if the reports over the past couple weeks are any indication, this decision has already been made. Robert Kraft expected to move on from Bill Belichick after this weekend, and it's one of those things that you knew was probably going to happen eventually, but seeing the headline of Bill Belichick fired as Patriots head coach, that's going to take a little bit to adjust to and wow, it really did happen.
It's not going to sink in for a while. Well, that's the thing too. Obviously none of this goes on forever.
Sure.
But I think in most people's minds, and even in the minds of Patriots fans, that this would end not because of on-field ineptitude. It would end because Bill Belichick is reaching retirement age and is just hanging up the whistle. That was kind of always the thought, was when you win all those Super Bowls, you basically make yourself unfireable, or when you build arguably the greatest dynasty the sport has ever seen, you in theory would make yourself unfireable. But if there's any league or sport on the planet in which you are truly never unfireable, it might be the National Football League.
Well, it almost kind of seems like, and look, there was always the debate when Brady was there, is it Brady, is it Belichick, is it a combination of the two? When Brady left, it almost kind of seemed like Bill Belichick refused to adapt to everything else going on in the world of the NFL, where he still feels like he can go out there and draft these no-name guys in the 6th and 7th round and expect them to go out there and be the superstars that they were with Tom Brady throwing the football. Well, it's not. You have Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. They're not Tom Brady, and they don't elevate guys the way that Tom Brady did. And then you had the fiasco a couple years ago with having Patricia as the offensive coordinator and all that kind of stuff when the offense isn't his game and feeling like he could outsmart everyone, and it's just kind of a mess of a situation that doesn't seem to be getting any better. So again, Patriots expected to move on from Bill Belichick after this weekend. We'll get Black Monday next Monday where all the firings and stuff happening, and I would assume Vrabel would probably be at the top of the list because of course his connections there to New England. I've also seen Josh McDaniels, who of course former New England offensive coordinator, that seemed to be the guy in line to take the job before he ends up going to Las Vegas. Brian Flores also floated out there, so a lot of options on the table. But regardless, and look, Bill Belichick's being rumored to like the Commanders or maybe even the Panthers, which he shouldn't take the Panthers job. That would be horrible for him if he did.
From this Patriots team to the Panthers would be pretty brutal.
I don't think Bill Belichick ends his career on a whimper with the Patriots. I think he goes somewhere else and tries to prove that he's not washed up.
Exactly. And that's the thing too. And a lot of coaches in the NFL or even like athletes, they I don't know if hubris is the right word, but they are very prideful. They are going to try. Giving it up is not easy. A lot of coaches and players talk about, after football, like life is pretty difficult because that's your identity.
Sure.
And Belichick does seem like the guy that I don't think he's going to be done unless he just personally is kind of maybe one of the reasons why they haven't been as successful is because he hasn't been as personally committed to that excellence because you've already experienced the mountaintop, or you might already be getting to that age of your life or that point in your life where you don't need football anymore. But he doesn't strike me as that kind of guy, and it's where he goes next would be interesting because he's obviously, because the name and the resume is going to be a hot commodity regardless if he could still coach the modern NFL.
Well, now the fact that Jim Harbaugh's taken Michigan in the national championship game, that's one potential name that's I would say probably not going to be on teams' boards with head coaches next year. Now, our team's going to go out there and try probably, but I imagine this brings Harbaugh back to Michigan at least for another couple of years.
Exactly. So you'd think. That's the thing.
Think.
Cracking into that man's psyche seems like a difficult chore.
I wouldn't want to look inside of the head of Jim Harbaugh, to be honest with you. I'd be afraid of what I'd see.
Yeah, there are unknown terrors that lie in that noggin, and I don't know exactly if we would even be able to understand or comprehend them once we were aware.
What did Patrick say in that one episode of SpongeBob? The inner workings of our mind are an enigma. And then it's spilt milk. That's what I imagine Jim Harbaugh's is.
An all-time great SpongeBob quote right there. And I feel like that's me sometimes. It's like, the inner machinations of my mind are an enigma, and it's just spilled milk.
That's a fair point.
Nothing going on up here. It's blank space.
We'll take a look at some other things that happened around college football over the course of bowl season as we get set to put a bow on the final year of the 4-team college football playoff with the national championship coming up on Monday between Washington and Michigan. It's halftime show. He is Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head. Going until 3 on The Game, the 107.5 The Game app, and now streaming live on The Game TV. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Elijah Campbell hanging out here with you for another couple minutes. I do need to issue a correction. As I said, following the halftime show, as always, is the afternoon show with Jay and Elijah. However, a new name debuting today.
That's right. Starting today, the afternoon show with Jay Phillips and Elijah Campbell will now be the post-game show with Jay Phillips and Elijah Campbell. Because I know before joining on, and we had some schedule reshuffling for a while. The afternoon show was kind of the placeholder name.
That's right.
After many meetings with the crack staff here at Cumulus Media, we have decided to stick with a game theme here, and we're going to be the post-game show. So starting today, effective immediately. I know Jay got the tweet out, and our tweet that's going to have the show link will also include the new bit of imaging. So we will be, starting today, the post-game show. New year, new us. Look, Game TV, post-game show, a lot of changes. 2024 is our year, folks.
Appreciate all you guys watching us right now on the Game TV. I'm inevitably going to mess up and still call you guys the afternoon show at some point because, it takes time. It's like when you get
I'll do it too, and I'm on the show.
It's like when you get into the new year, and this isn't as present now because I'm not writing the date out every single day like I was in school or whatever. But like for the first month, you're still going to write the previous year and then like scratch out like, oh, crap, we're in 2024, not 2023 now.
Oh, all the time. Because we have to put your name, the date, like in the like your heading, and all the time. I was a serial offender of that. Or even like when I was an intern at a radio station in Nashville, we'd have to sort all of our files, all the audio clips, everything into a certain day show folder.
Right. And
from one year to the next, for about a month, I kept calling 2018, 2017, and the folders were labeled January blank, 2017. And then I'd have to go back and do all of it because it took me about a week to realize that I was getting it wrong.
I could see how that would be problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be very problematic. And it was not an easy mess to fix up.
So now that we are in 2024, we're again getting set to put the bow on college football coming up Monday night with the College Football Playoff National Championship. But I want to comb back through the last couple days of bowl games we've not gotten the opportunity to talk about. Perhaps the least hyped bowl game going into bowl season was the Orange Bowl between Georgia and Florida State. And Georgia ends up thumping Florida State 63-3, besting their 58-point victory over TCU in last year's national championship game. And look, I don't think anybody expected Florida State to come out there and beat Georgia. And it's just, especially for as much conversation around Florida State, hey, we deserve to be here, we deserve to be in the playoff, all that kind of stuff. You would have liked to have seen a little bit more effort. And I get they had opt-outs, they had guys transferring, all that kind of stuff. Well, Georgia did too. They had about the same number of opt-outs and guys sitting out as Florida State did. And again, I didn't expect Florida State to win, but you would have liked to have seen a little bit more of than what the limp effort they went out there and showed. Like that to me, and then Norvell getting up there and complaining about opt-outs, like bad looks for a team that I think a lot of the nation was behind. Like you had a legitimate argument for being in the college football playoff. Go out there and put up a valiant fight over what was just the number one team a couple weeks ago and earn some more brownie points from people, and they didn't do that.
I mean, even if they went out and got beat, 42-10, 42-13, something like that. But the fact that, it was just from the get-go, not being able to move the ball, the energy was zapped. You could just tell.
They were going through the motions in the second half.
Yeah.
Really before the second half.
You don't have to be a body language expert to be able to watch half that game and realize one team is not invested whatsoever. And one team who, had a lot of opt-outs, but a lot of important players decided to come back and play. Carson Beck could have, just opted out or whatever, but he decided to come back and play. A lot of those players, like the running backs, Dwan Edwards, and insert Georgia, Ladd McConkey, insert Georgia skill position not named Brock Bowers here because they have a lot of good ones.
Yep.
They decided to come back and they wanted to make a statement, and they absolutely did. The team that wanted to be there, even though neither team really wants to be there, but one team, brought a little bit of soul with them to Miami, and that team was not from Tallahassee.
And again, you have two teams in a very similar boat. And look, Florida State, I think, held a little bit more of a potential there with having an undefeated season as well as a conference championship. But Georgia, again, was one of the 4 best teams in the country before the SEC championship game, and it's funny that they're suddenly number 6. So they had their own argument as well. And again, they wanted to go out there and say, hey, here's a team that a lot of people thought was going to be in the college football playoff. Let's just beat the crap out of them and really make a statement, to show people, hey, we're as good as we think we are. And again, Florida State didn't have to win the game, but if you put up a valiant effort, people are at least saying, hey, you know what, they tried, they gave it their best shot. And, I don't think the funny thing to me is seeing like Noel's Twitter last night, watching these playoff games, like, yeah, Florida State would have beaten both these teams. I don't think so.
No, absolutely not.
Could their defense have maybe hung in there and made things interesting? Sure, as we saw against Louisville, but nothing about their offense showed me that they could have hung in there with Alabama, Michigan, Washington, or Texas.
Oh God, no. I mean, and that's the thing too. Yeah, I get it, and it is ironic, and it'll be funny to point and laugh at Alabama and Jalen Milroe for only throwing for 116 yards when one of the rationale for Florida State was, oh, their quarterback didn't throw for anything against Louisville. Like that funny, haha. I get it, but you're still not winning that game because what we saw last night with Michigan is that Michigan is a damn good football team that is loaded with 5 stars at the skill positions and on the offense and defensive line. When it became big boy football in the fourth quarter, they were able to control the line of scrimmage. They would have done that against Florida State and some.
I was amazed at the fact, and look, we knew that Alabama's offensive line wasn't good this year. They got better as the season went along and gave up a few sacks here and there against Tennessee and Georgia, but they seem to be playing better than they did at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
The way Michigan was able to pin their ears back and just attack Milroe, especially in that first half, we know that Alabama's predicated itself off of big plays, explosive plays. That's where the majority of over half of Milroe's touchdown passes have been on those long deep balls. He only got 3 passes off of greater than 20 yards. One of them went to Isaiah Bond right before halftime. Like, they just did not allow Alabama to play the type of offense that they played this year. Like a masterful game plan, and I think they blitzed him on 56% of his dropbacks. Like, they brought the heat each and every time and put all pressure on that struggling offensive line. How many bad snaps did Seth McLaughlin have, including on that last play? Quite a bit, and it came back to bite him. So, again, you don't have to like Michigan, but you got to respect what they did last night.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing, too. I get not liking Michigan, but it's just, and I get some of the skepticism going into the game because, we had the Twitter poll, at 107.5 the game. Who do you think is going to go? Who's going to be playing for the national title? And only 11 people picked one of the results that had Michigan in it.
Sure.
And it's like, yes, I know it's not sexy at times. There's a lot of games this year where it wasn't sexy, even in a 52-7 win. Like over Indiana. They don't get a lot of big plays because they don't need to. They methodically march down the field because they're constantly the best team at the line of scrimmage. And that means so much in these football games, especially when the margins are so small.
It does. And I played the clip earlier of Jim Harbaugh lofting praise at J.J. McCarthy. And McCarthy is such an interesting conundrum when you talk about a college football quarterback who started for 2 seasons, 1 loss up to this point being that semifinal game against TCU. And you don't really think of him as being like this super successful guy because he's never had to really put the team on his back necessarily. Like, they scored a lot of points in that TCU game. Defense let him down there. Last night, and he had the one throw to Isaiah Wilson where he got tipped and goes up and makes the play and ends up running it in. So, he didn't have to go out there and be the superstar, and he hasn't really been put in that position. And that's what I was wondering going into this game, especially after all the Connor Stallion stuff happened. McCarthy hasn't been asked to do a whole lot. And last night, went out there, played very efficiently, completed 17 of 27 passes for 3 touchdowns, did exactly what you need to do. That's not blowing you away with 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he's efficient. And again, if he goes out there and wins the national championship, he's going to be remembered as one of the most effective college football quarterbacks ever.
Yeah, and the way he does it is just different than a lot of the quarterbacks that are in the playoff now. Like, he's not going to do what Michael Penix did last night. He'll never be that guy. And I don't think he'll ever be a starter in the NFL. Because he doesn't have that type of level of, wowness to his game where he's going to go out there and sling it. But he didn't put the ball in harm's way at any point during that game. He knew he had a good running game. They got, bit by bit, marched down the field whenever they were moving the ball. They didn't try to hit explosive plays because that's not their MO. That's not what they do. I mean, his average depth of target last night was 6 yards.
Yeah.
And for an entire game, that is pretty low. They were not trying to take deep shots. It's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to pick up chunk yards at a time, milk some clock, and really just Big Ten the heck out of that game. And that's what they did. And credit to him. And McCarthy does that really, really well. So when people see, the Penn State game this year where he didn't throw the ball for the entire second half, or they're like, well, the question's always, Or they did not throw the ball because they didn't need to or because they don't trust them. I feel like they trust them when it matters. But when you're so good at running the ball and you don't need to do that, why force it?
And who scored the touchdown to end up winning the game for them? That would be Blake Corum, taking the Michigan record in doing so. And that's been such the MO of their offense that is going to prove to be pivotal when they take on Washington here in a couple of nights. I'm very excited for the national championship game. And, look, I love the SEC as much as the next guy, but, it's not bad to have a refreshing, different time and matchup in the national championship for once. And we're getting the final swan song of the Pac-12 with Michigan or Washington getting set, which, by the way, Michigan and Washington play each other as conference opponents this fall, which is going to be weird to think about. But we'll get our traditional, and I know people said, hey, play this game in the Rose Bowl because it's a traditional Rose Bowl matchup, but the last hurrah of a once great conference with the potential to win the national championship in Washington, and a blue blood in Michigan getting back to the national championship for the first time in 25 years.
It's storylines galore. I mean, and clashing styles. One team that likes to spray the ball over the yard, one that wants to march it up and down the field methodically.
Absolutely. More on that, obviously, as the day goes along. Coming up next, though, it's the greatest day in the history of the world. As the halftime show rolls along, he's Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head. Here on The Game, the 107.5 Game app, and streaming live, finally, on The Game TV. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Elijah Campbell going with you until 3. Then it's the post-game show with Jay Phillips and Elijah Campbell coming up 3, which you'll be able to watch on The Game TV, which we are streaming on right now thanks to our friends over at Integrated Media. So you can go to the 107.5 The Game Twitter page and find that link where you can watch us all day long now. See our beautiful smiling faces as we talk all things sports, specifically Gamecock sports. It is time, though, for the greatest day in the history of the world. Today, January the 2nd, as you would imagine, as happens when January 1st falls on a Sunday, a lot of bowl games took place, big bowl games, on January 2nd over the years. I'll start off with this one. I would have been like 6 months old. 1997, number 3 Florida takes down number 1 Florida State 52-20 in the Sugar Bowl, which that year was for the national championship, a rematch of obviously the rivalry game they played at the end of November where Florida State had beaten them 24-20. Florida State gets its revenge and gets the national championship under Steve Spurrier.
Wow. And that was a Wuerffel Heisman year, right?
Yes, 96.
Okay. Yeah, 96, yeah. So Wuerffel Heisman year, and then follows that up by absolutely shredding Florida State in that game. And of course, this is back, in the day when the BCS or the Bowl Alliance, or now we call them, the New Year's Six, bowl games had the very hardcore conference affiliations for each one. Always ACC or whoever in SEC always the winner always going to the Sugar Bowl.
Now there was
fun bygone here.
Now with the Alliance, their initial idea was to try and match up number 1 and number 2 in the coalition before that. To try and match up number 1 and 2 as much as they can, but that pesky Rose Bowl, always a thorn in the side because they would not waver from the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And, I've been talking all morning long about or all day long about, Rose Bowl wanting its 2 o'clock kickoff. And that's the reason why the Sugar Bowl went so late last night. Like, so much tradition's gone out the door. Come on, we can change that, right? Like, screw your 2 o'clock kickoff. Move it up an hour.
There might not be a bigger opponent to progress in college football than not just bowl games, but the Rose Bowl specifically.
The Rose Bowl was the last one to hop on the 12-team playoff, too, because they were trying to finalize that, and the Rose Bowl was like, we don't know if we want to do that. And they were the last one to come to the table for that, eventually agreeing to it, because now, if things hold serve, we're going to have a Rose Bowl on like January the 11th in a couple of years, which you want to talk about straying from tradition. That's straying from tradition. And I swear to God, if they have a 2 o'clock kickoff in that game, I'm going to lose my mind. But yeah, a lot of things change in college football, and that being the one thing that does not seem to want to change. We'll stick with big bowl games here. I'm going to go back to 2014, January the 2nd. Oklahoma defeats Alabama 45-31. That was obviously at the end of the 2013 season. Had the kick 6 that eventually kept Alabama having not only the SEC championship game, but the BCS national championship. And was Alabama interested in that Sugar Bowl? Not really. This game is significant to me, though, because for a lot of people, it was their first introduction to one Derrick Henry. 8 carries, 100 yards that night, 1 touchdown. He had some carries that season, went for 111 against Arkansas in 2013. But on a national stage, a lot of people saw the tractor that was Derrick Henry that would terrorize college football for the next couple of years and obviously go on to do that in the NFL with the Titans as well.
It might be, if we're talking productivity and talking efficiency, the best running back, in the post running back era. Obviously it's not a valued position like it was, but in this era of post running back appreciation, he might be the best one we've had in a decade and a half. Or the most dominant.
He is a very rare breed. And look, I remember hearing about this guy when he was coming out of Yulee High School in Florida. Like, this guy's different. This guy is special. He's a genetic freak at running back. Like, wait to see what he does when he gets to Alabama and then to the NFL. And I would say he's lived up to the hype in every single facet of the game so far, which for so many years, the Titans offense has revolved around get Derrick Henry the ball. He's going to end up throwing somebody 20 yards with a stiff arm and scoring at some point. Like, just do that and then pass on 3rd and long.
I don't think I will ever see a stiff arm as mean as Derrick Henry's. And it's like, okay, well, he might have one or, like most players have, 1 or 2 highlight reel stiff arms or whatever. You can maybe have a compilation of Derrick Henry stiff arms last at least 10 minutes, like on a YouTube video, because he has a list of victims that he has victimized with that offhand.
Well, and I remember when he was at Alabama and they played Michigan State in that Cotton Bowl in the playoff, he flipped a defensive lineman with the stiff, That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
It is ridiculous strength. I mean, otherworldly strength that he has, and then he can reach top speeds of your best or fastest wide receiver, and might be the most hardest person to tackle. And it's one of those things that in a football game, you're in the fourth quarter, you're a defensive player, you're tired, you've been going at it all game. The last thing I want to have to do is try to tackle that man right there. Like, it's not a coincidence that this man's most of his yards he gains in his career is in the fourth quarter, because in a war of attrition, that man does not slow down. And ultimately, after 3.5 quarters, you still got to try to tackle that man.
Right.
And that's how he's picking up all these yards after contact.
Running over tired defenses. Last one here for the greatest day in the history of the world. Not so great day 1 year ago. Monday Night Football. Bills and Bengals, the Damar Hamlin cardiac arrest 1 year ago today.
Wow.
That was one of the most insane things I've ever witnessed in a live sporting event. Obviously thankful that Damar Hamlin is 100% healthy and back with the Bills this season, but crazy to think that was already been a year ago since that happened.
Yeah, and I still get chills thinking about the response to, and to save his life, and the trainer that started doing CPR on him isn't even he's one of the assistant trainers.
Right.
But not just in sports, in life, you got to stay ready so you never have to get ready. And for people that are in that position, that are trainers, they go into these games, they never want to have to be used.
Yeah.
They don't want to be out there having to assist hurt football players, because obviously we want the health and safety of all these people to be paramount. But it became a life and death situation, and that guy, when you needed his best, he gave you more than his best, and it saved a man's life. And it was that's the one thing that when I look back on that thing now that we're a year in retrospect, is the most remarkable thing, just how ready he was to go out there, and with all the pressure, someone's life on the line, he pulled through. That was awesome.
Absolutely. No, I recommend to everyone, if you can, get CPR certified, because you never know when you're going to put in a scenario like that. Obviously, maybe not in the middle of an NFL game, but you never know when you may encounter something in your life. We got the NFL awards coming up here in a couple of weeks, right before the Super Bowl. I mean, Damar Hamlin, he has to win Comeback Player of the Year, right? I know he hasn't played much for the Bills, but to go from being legitimately not alive on the field to surviving and still being healthy enough to play football, I think for this season at least, you got to give it to him, right?
I think so too, and it is a remarkable story. Just that he's even well enough to play and be physically active.
Right.
I understand the Joe Flacco thing, because that is hilarious to me, that Joe Flacco is here slinging it and has multiple 300-yard passing games this year. Joe Flacco, and for the Cleveland Browns of all franchises, but. That's not as impressive to me as coming back, from near death on a football field and being able to live the life you want to be able to live not long after that, because not a lot of people get that fortunate.
Absolutely. So, again, greatest day in the history of the world. Real quick, hit some celebrity birthdays here. If you're into movies, Dax Shepard, 49 years old today.
Wow, 49, wow.
What was the first role you think of with Dax Shepard?
Oh, I think Employee of the Month.
Same.
That movie, I've seen it way too many times. It is not a good movie by any means, but it is so funny, and I still quote it to this day sometimes.
Also, Cuba Gooding Jr. So people our age probably introduced to him in Snow Dogs.
I was going to say Snow Dogs, Radio.
Radio, obviously. Yeah. He was part of the O.J. Simpson series on FX a couple years ago. Did a very good job with that. 56. I didn't think he was that old.
Wow. Okay. I can kind of see it just from the OJ show. Did a really good job. But Cuba Gooding Jr. 56. Right. I think Radio for me. Radio then Snow Dogs.
And first. Again, two very good movies there. Obviously, an endless list of things that he's done. But yes, Cuba Gooding Jr. 56. Dax Shepard 49 years old. That is the greatest day in the history of the world. We'll wrap up today's edition of the Halftime Show with more of your text from the Firehouse Subs text line coming up. On the Halftime Show, he's Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head here on The Game, 107.5 The Game app, and now streaming on The Game TV. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Elijah Campbell along with you for just a couple more minutes before the post-game show with Jay and Elijah takes you from 3 until 6. It is time for another Firehouse Subs text of the hour. And I imagine you and Jay are probably going to dive into this as well. But I brought up earlier the fiasco from Saturday night in the Lions-Cowboys game of Brad Allen just not understanding who was reporting as eligible. The Lions' 2-point conversion gets taken off the board, and the Cowboys end up winning 20-19 in the Saturday night, Monday night football game. Scott weighs in and says, unfortunately, you're not going to find out anything about the officials because the NFL does not ever do anything about it, and you're not even allowed to talk about the officials, and nobody is making the NFL fans or nobody's pushing them to have some kind of explanation for these type of calls. Now, there is one pool reporter that gets to talk to the head official after the game, ask any kind of questions, but it's not a media scrum like you see with the players and the coaches and all that stuff, which I would love to see change. And I threw this out there earlier, and I've long held this stance that, look, I don't think there's a fix when it comes to these officials. I don't think they're being handed envelopes of money to say, hey, we need the Cowboys to win this game. Go out there and make sure that they win this game. I just think they're generally inept at their jobs. And a lot of that, to me, goes back to the fact that they're not full-time employees. They do not dedicate all of their time to being officials in the NFL. They have other jobs. They're lawyers and bankers and all this other kind of stuff. It's something they do on the weekends. And again, it takes up a good half the year for them to do it. But I would love to see, and again, you got to have a CBA and all that kind of stuff to make this happen. But I would love to see the officials in the NFL be full-time, where their only job is officiating the NFL. Maybe they do the UFL in the offseason or go to camps in the summer, whatever it may be, but their time should be dedicated to understanding and enforcing the rules on an NFL field, because at this point, it's getting out of hand how bad this officiating has become.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, is that one of the hardest jobs in the whole National Football League is officiating the National Football League, because you're having to keep up physically with people who are significantly more athletic than you. You're having to watch things and make almost, in some instances, split-second decisions on bang-bang plays. And I do not envy that job. I wouldn't want it. And you're constantly under public scrutiny. That's why, and for all the same reasons you laid out, it should be a full-time job. Your hardest jobs should be the full-time ones. And part of what makes this job, so hard is all the rules that you have to know and remember. It makes it easier to know and remember if you are constantly refreshed on them.
Exactly.
You're constantly practicing where what the rules are, what the newer rules are going to be. And just be constantly having it drilled in you will avoid a lot of stuff, because it's a sloppy mistake, right?
Yeah.
It's a sloppy mistake.
Well, and you mentioned it there.
Saturday.
Look, when you're talking about bang-bang plays, pass interference, those kind of things, bad calls are going to happen. That's just part of it. It's the human element of the game, and that's always going to exist. But if you're an official and number 68, who's 6 foot whatever, 300 and whatever pounds,
big boys,
comes up to you and says, I'm reporting as eligible, and you just forget his number and say it's number 70 instead, you can't make that mistake.
No.
Like, that can't happen. And then to double back on it and say, like, we have the video evidence. Taylor Decker is in his face saying, I'm reporting as eligible, and then the other guy, number 70, is, Dan Skipper is 20 feet behind him. Like, you can't make that mistake. That is inexcusable. And I did see earlier that Brad Allen's crew got assigned to the Steelers-Ravens game for this weekend. Thankfully, the Ravens have already locked up the number 1 seed, so there's no major implications on the line there, but they could screw something up there as well, because they've screwed up other things this season.
Easily could screw something up that might affect the game, and they shouldn't be in the playoffs just because they've had a really bad year. But if making them full time will cut out a lot of the careless things.
Well, and you mentioned, and the NFL's put out a report, hey, they're likely not going to get a postseason assignment, which they shouldn't, and that's good. But that's not enough for me, because if players and coaches can get fined for speaking out about bad officiating, which is justified, officials should be able to get penalized monetarily for making horrendous calls like that.
Right, and that's that one. I don't know if I've ever entertained the thought, because being bad at your job for them is different than I guess like a football player when they're bad at their jobs. The Ravens won't fine. The Jacksonville Jaguars won't fine Trevor Lawrence for an interception.
Sure.
But
unless playing time, he can get benched.
But you can, exactly.
Which
so it
does affect your money at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. But there's got to be some way to, I guess, be able to control. And you can if they are full-time.
Yes.
And have, a constant roster of referees, maybe be able to, heighten up the training, because in the offseason, that's what you're doing constantly. In the season, it's what you're doing constantly. So it starts with making them full-time and making it to where that is an attractive option.
The frustrating thing to me about all this is we're coming away from another game between two of the best teams in the league with Detroit and Dallas. And instead of talking about this great game and this great comeback that Detroit had in the last second of the game and the 2-point conversion and, the gall of Dan Campbell to even call that 2-point conversion, we're talking about officiating because it presents itself as the main story coming away from it. And that's what gets frustrating is whether it be Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football. And I would have the same reaction if this was a 1 o'clock game between the Panthers and the Bears that nobody cared about. Like, you're still making it about the officiating because it's affecting the end of the game.
Because it's been that bad. Yeah, exactly. And that's the nightmare scenario for the NFL, is that in a big game like that, like what happened in the 2018 NFC Championship game, no one talked about how great of a game that was.
No
one cared.
Everybody remembers that play.
And that's all anyone will ever remember about that game. And it
wake up in the middle of the night sweating about that play at times.
Oh, man, I still to this day get very mad about that game. I don't like that one still hurts. As someone who is a lifelong New Orleans Saints fan, haven't gotten over that one. Still pretty salty about it. Wasted a really good year.
Because that should have sent the Saints to the Super Bowl.
That would have ended
theoretically.
The game. Yep, because that would have been the first down, just like Washington last night. That would have been the first down needed to completely end the game. There is no coming back from that. You're taking knees. We're going home, and that's would have been the case.
Well, we can only hope things get better. I don't have high hopes, but we'll see. That'll do it for today's edition of the Halftime Show. Coming up next, the post-game show. Jay Phillips, Elijah Campbell with you until 3, continuing to react to everything that happened yesterday in the college football playoff semifinals and everything else going on in the world of sports right here on The Game and the 107.5 The Game app.